Welcome back to Inside Story. We're discussing Barack Obama's vision for a nuclear-free world and whether that is truly achievable. Our panel today, of course, in Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz; in Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer; and in London is Kate Hudson. Thank you for staying with us. In this half of the show, I want to talk about the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, explain a bit of it to our viewers and then have a chat about it. It is a treaty designed to limit the spread of nuclear weapons. 189 countries signed up, including the 5 official nuclear powers. Have a look at the map. The numbers you're going to see are the current nuclear warhead estimates from the Federation of American Scientists. The US is there, of course, the first and only country to have used an atomic bomb. That was on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in what it claimed was the only way to end World War II. Russia was the next country. Of course, it was the Soviet Union back then, after a volunteer spy from the US actually helped them begin the arms race. You've got 2 European countries, the UK and France. They were next, building something of a Western alliance against Moscow. Across in Asia, China, it is part of the NPT, of the treaty. Those are the 5, but the rest, they are not. Those volatile neighbours, India and Pakistan, both have nuclear weapons, as apparently does North Korea, which of course tested its nuclear device in 2006. And finally, Israel, a country widely believed to have nuclear weapons, but which has neither confirmed nor denied it. Kate Hudson in London, I'm going to come back to you. Do you believe the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is actually an effective treaty, that it does what it's supposed to?
I think it's probably had a restraining influence over the last decade since it came into force, because at that time there was great fears that 30 or 40 states would develop nuclear weapons, that all the countries with nuclear power might go down the nuclear road, and that hasn't on the whole happened. There's been a relatively small incidence of proliferation. So perhaps that has contributed to that. Of course, where it hasn't been so successful is on the other, or one of the other pillars of the treaty, which is the disarmament pillar. And the bargain that was made at the time the treaty was originated was that those countries that had nuclear weapons would begin the process of disarmament. That was their committed goal, and in exchange those countries that didn't have them wouldn't get them. There was also an agreement that everyone would have access to nuclear energy for civil purposes. But basically disarmament and non-proliferation were 2 sides of the same treaty coin. And of course those 5 countries which signed as nuclear weapons states at the time still have nuclear arsenals. So it's been somewhat less successful on that front, although of course there have been reductions. Where I think it does present a problem, and I think this is something that the international community needs to very much address, is around this guarantee that countries or signatories have the right to develop nuclear power as long as it's for civilian purposes. But of course, nuclear power, we know that the production processes are very, very similar.
They can lead to the
interlinked with
weapons. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. They can lead to nuclear weapons. So encouraging, as is now happening, encouraging many new countries to develop nuclear energy, of course, does open the door further to the dangers of proliferation. So within that treaty are these contradictory factors which seem in some ways to pull in different directions.
Well, let's look at an example, and I'm going to put this to Pavel Felgenhauer in Moscow. India, for example, not signed up to the treaty, obviously pursuing nuclear power. And then you have an Indian Defence Ministry spokesman who I've read who said that in the next 5 to 7 years, India will have 300 to 400 nuclear weapons deployed. That's the complete opposite of what it's supposed to do. I know it's not signed up, but surely they should be more worried about maybe a country like India than focusing so much on the others.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, but there's a problem with proliferation, and it's getting worse. As the capability, I mean, making nuclear weapons, or kind of primitive nuclear weapons, first generation type, well, that's the technology of the 40s and early 50s. And of course, an increasing number of countries has the capability to master that technology, and also, of course, the technology of making, well, rather primitive but still effective ballistic missiles. And the two are often connected. Like, say, North Korea, not the most kind of developed country in the world, has a primitive nuclear weapon, has primitive ballistic missiles. So it's to keep the proliferation regime, at least partially, is of course very important. And this is a cause that more or less unites opposing or partially opposing countries like Russia and the United States, because neither Russia nor the United States nor other major official nuclear powers want to see nuclear weapons to proliferate. And they're ready to, at least some extent, to work together to prevent that.
Richard Weitz in DC, I want to ask you about Israel, which we mentioned in our little graphic sequence before, obviously not signed up to the NPT. When is this, I think I can use this word, it's almost a charade about their nuclear weapons. When is this going to end? When is it going to become official that they've got the weapons and that they will or won't sign up to any sort of treaty or disarmament?
Well, as you probably noticed in Obama's speech when he was talking about nuclear disarmament and so on, he didn't mention Israel or the Middle East. And there's a good reason. And it's unfortunate because the whole issue is spilling over into other realms. So, for example, Egypt and some of the Arab countries aren't willing to sign on to some of the biological or chemical weapons convention because they're concerned about Israel having another unconventional force, i.e. nuclear weapons. And Israel has comparable concerns. That's a tough problem because it's feeding into an implicit assumption in the United States that Israel with nuclear weapons is going to be a more responsible actor actually in the Middle East, more comfortable about making negotiations, less likely to attack Iran if it also has a nuclear deterrent. So you've got countervailing pressures there. I don't see the Obama administration or any U.S. administration pressing Israel on this issue. It would have to probably come from some other source.
But is there an opportunity with what Barack Obama has been saying to push maybe some of those other countries into signing up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? Because that is the essence of what he's talking about getting rid of the weapons, or at the very least not increasing them. Is this now a golden opportunity to make the NPT work?
Well, certainly, as the previous speaker mentioned, that it's an obligation of the United States and the other 5 nuclear powers to make progress towards elimination of nuclear weapons. And insofar as his proposals are carried through, we see a reduction in the size of the U.S. nuclear forces. We see a U.S. commitment to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty, and some other issues which are associated with the NPT. That will make the position of the United States and the forces who want to strengthen the NPT somewhat stronger than previously. But there are countervailing pressures. You've mentioned Israel, you've talked about Korea, South Asia, and there are other countries that are suspicious. And we've got the tension in the NPT between disarmament, non-proliferation, and then the transfer, the injunction to try and help other countries develop nuclear energy, even though it's now become apparent this is a pathway towards nuclear weapons. So it's a contribution what the president's making, but it will require further efforts along these lines.
Very informative discussion today, folks, on a very thorny issue. My thanks to Richard Weitz in Washington, D.C., Pavel Felgenhauer in Moscow, and Kate Hudson in London. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our viewers for joining us again for Inside Story. If you've got a suggestion or a comment you'd like us to talk about, send it to that email address there. It's insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team, goodbye for now.